I always ask prematurely, but are we on?
Almost.
That's always the reply. Yeah.
Oh, it's giving me a funny message, but let me see. Okay, I think we're good. Joaquin, take it away.
All righty. Well, good evening, everybody. It's good to see everyone here. Kelsey, Gretchen, it's good to see you from 20 minutes ago when we were in our last meeting together. Professor Bradshaw, thank you so much for joining us. I know it took a lot of courage to come back and face this. Let's do a round of introductions since it's been a while since we've all seen the professor, but we all know each other. But I'll go first. My name is Joaquin. I am a member of the Human Rights Commission, and I chair this task force. And it's good to see you all. Kelsey, who are you and why are you here?
I ask myself that every day.
It's a good question.
Ooh. My name is Kelsey Murray. I use she, her pronouns. I am a member of Ward 4. Well, I live in Ward 4. I'm a member of the Human Rights Commission.
Residency is a type of membership, right? I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. And I'm going to popcorn to David.
Hello, this is David Reinhold, a member of the commission and also a resident in Polk County. And I'll pass it off to Gretchen.
Good evening, Gretchen Bennett, staff to the commission, the liaison to the commission, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'll pass to Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy. I'm with the, let's see, I am a member of the Human Rights Commission as well as this task force. I live in Ward 4. Actually, I don't live in Ward 4. I live in South Salem, I'll say that. And I will pass it to Marianne.
Good evening, Marianne Bradshaw. I use she, her pronouns. I'm here this evening as a guest. I teach a class at Western Oregon University, and this task force has kindly been a client to that student several times. And I'm just here to participate in the agenda item around that survey. Thank you for having me.
Lucky we are for that partnership. Thank you, everybody. Gretchen, have we received any public comment?
No, none received.
That's a shame. Is there a motion among members of this task force, David and Kathy, I'm looking at you, to approve the minutes from last time?
According to the minutes, neither of us were at that meeting, or is it still okay if we move to approve them?
I think yes, but I'll wait for Gretchen's.
Yeah, you can move, but then you should abstain from voting. And so then, but you do have a quorum, so we can invite Joaquin to affirm them.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve them.
Is there a second? Can I also second?
Sure, yep.
Sure, I second, and boy, I affirm it.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you for that. We have two real agenda items, but let's do the one that we're all here for, which is the talking about the belonging survey. It's been some time since we had a conversation, and just to refresh all of our memories, the survey went out in May. We got a lot of insightful data collection, which we have, which the students really put into an amazing report, which we have then presented to council subsequently. That was recently, actually, that was last month, and it wasn't Hamadi, it was Lisa Novak, Commissioner Novak, who did it, and I'm grateful to her for doing that. And we've identified some areas of interest policy-wise that we'd like to work on as a full commission in the coming year as a result of the survey. But what we're here to talk about today is kind of some process questions. We kind of want to talk about how everything went, lessons learned, things we might want to do differently, things we really liked about the process. Professor Bradshaw, we internally have had that conversation a little bit already, but not for some time. So looking forward to having that again here today, and then giving updates around and discussion around translation and finalizing some of the content in anticipation of the coming cycle. And briefly on that, I'll say that we my hopes, and I think I'm reflecting the general sentiment given our last few conversations on this topic. My hope is that we can have either coming out of this meeting or in the immediate future have a kind of finalized language in English around what we like. Not to say it can't change in the future, but just what is it that we want to keep, which is probably most things from this survey here, and then having that language in English concretized so that we can then have a full Spanish translation, which we kind of already do, so little tweaks there, but so that we can then handing it over to a translation service to translate into other languages. That's the big goal in the next few months, is to have it translated into other languages, which we had hoped to do this last year, but which for various reasons didn't happen that we wanted to. And so so actually let's kind of start in reverse order. Let's start there, given that it is our kind of one of the goals. So I guess, Gretchen, I'll ask you, my understanding last time we talked about this, which was some time ago now, was that the city was looking for a vendor to contract with to provide language services. Is there an update around that, or any more insight around what that process looks like moving forward?
Yeah, you bet. It's not finalized yet. What the communications team decided to do after our experience is to try to enter into separate, essentially grant agreements or contract agreements with different local nonprofit organizations who could provide translation that might reflect the local dialects and local experience. And so they've identified a number of organizations in a number of languages, and have some thoughts about how that agreement process can work, but haven't finalized those yet. And I'm particularly watching the Chuukese Marshallese component, because I know those are the two that we wanted to add. I checked back in, I think about a week ago, and they didn't have it finalized yet. And I reminded them of our objective and our timeline, because I've been keeping them up to date on our intentions. And so we don't have it yet, but I know they're working on it.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Can I ask, English, Spanish, Chuukese, and Marshallese are the ones we've talked about.
Yep.
I know when I look at like the school district, I get lots of stuff from them. I think Russian is included. Do we feel good about those four, or is there a conversation? Maybe you've already decided that those are the four to focus on.
We
I
have
just wondered
not.
Okay.
That is one of the questions for today. Is we've talked about yeah, there you go, you stole my thunder, good for you. No, it's good. Are there other languages, to the professor's question, that folks would be interested in seeing represented? Because really, I mean, I don't know, Gretchen, you would probably have better insight than I would around what that looks like in terms of workload for the vendor, but not the sky's the limit exactly, but we have resources now, I think, maybe potentially to do this, and we have time, importantly. I mean, the Spanish one I kind of did, back of the napkin in the week leading up to it, and I think it turned out fine, but it was
great.
No, thanks. But it was that's done, but we won't have that process for the other languages. So other than the two mentioned already, any other, I think Russian is a really good idea. Any other ideas?
I would want to look at what the top line, those are the ones that I'm aware of. I don't know what else, how the others rank as far as the languages, most spoken in this area, but I know at work we focus on Spanish and Russian. So yeah, I didn't look at that before this meeting today, but I don't know what others are represented in this area.
I know in the state of Oregon, Russian is the third most spoken language. So I think that would be a good top priority.
Yeah, thank you, Kelsey. The American Community Survey, which is done by the Census Bureau annually, as opposed to the decennial census, marks language. And so here I'm looking here at an official government source here for Marion and Polk County. So quick, but I think pretty faithful to what's happening on the ground. It said, okay, so Spanish 30,000 speakers in Marion County. Obviously, that's easy to think of. Russian, second. Chinese, Vietnamese, and then Marshallese. So those are the 5 languages they list as the most spoken other than English in Marion County. Toggling over to Polk, they're the same languages in a different order. So if that helps us.
I'll have to check on budget. I've been a bit concerned about what the prices will end up looking like and what the cost will be around the languages that we've talked about. And there's not an external requirement to do the translation unless there's a request by a community member to make the survey available. And in this case, we're doing a proactive, preemptive translation, which of course is always good and welcome. But the general fund, which is the revenue source that we're in, is constrained. And so I'm not sure how many I'll be able to do or what the cost will be, since we're in this changing environment for the cost of the survey. So that could be a factor too, as I learn more. So it'd be good to have direction from this group if you'd alter the prioritization. Chuukese and Marshallese came from, I think, Commissioner Jackie Leung recommending that we do that, and being open to help spread the word amongst those communities here in Salem. Joaquin, you were tremendous with your gift of time of translating Spanish for us. That's huge. Thank you.
So generous. It's a big project.
It is a big project. Yeah.
The Spanish one I'd be happy to tweak, depending on what happens from our conversation. So that one doesn't have to go out again. It isn't hard, but it's like with each kind of branching question, ends up being like 80 or 85 pages of questions or something like that. So then that becomes kind of hard, but the actual translation is not. Go ahead, please.
I feel like, Gretchen, as you go get information, that's helpful. When we looked at Marshallese and Chuukese, my comment was, yes, let's translate, but the use of that translation depends on having contacts with those communities. So where Commissioner Leung says, I will help with the translation and help with the distribution, then I say, let's do it.
Right.
I do feel like from a numbers standpoint, I think it's, I would recommend to the commission that you consider Russian if the funding allows that. But I think translating into Russian, if we don't have any community organization or contact or way to distribute the survey to folks who are primarily Russian speakers, then it's not likely to be used much. And I think, the way Qualtrics sets this up, you can toggle each page between the languages. And Russian Google Translate could get something of a start with the Spanish. I mean, it's helpful to a certain extent, but Chuukese and Marshallese, we don't even have that because they're not in Google Translate. So I think I would recommend exploring Russian from a cost standpoint and from a community contact standpoint.
I was going to mention that if we are going to go to the time and expense of translating it, we need to make sure that we make an extra effort to get the survey out to those folks who are going to use that version of it. Absolutely. And I don't know what our Russian, if we have contacts in the Russian community. I haven't seen or heard anything. I don't know, Gretchen, do you know, is that something that we've?
I'll have to go back and look. For me personally, I want to say it's been 7 or 8 years. We did have some relationships with the Human Rights Commission quite a while ago. And I remember even going up and participating in a radio program. But those folks moved away, and I don't think we maintained relationships that I'm aware of. But I'll ask around with my counterparts at the city, because it may just be that I don't have that relationship right now, and see what I can find.
My only reactions around Russian, are, as someone who has spent a lot of time in Woodburn,
Mhm.
which is where the Farm Workers Union is, and that's where my father worked when I was growing up, and that's where I do a lot of my professional activities today, which is in Marion County. That is where a significant Russian population is. Not to say they're not in Salem, or that they don't do business in Salem, but in terms of outreach, a lot of it would likely be at a Woodburn-based organizations and community-based organizations, because that's where the community is in large part. Woodburn is a overwhelmingly migrant Latino community and a Russian Orthodox enclave community there as well. So that might be a place to start. I also think it'd be interesting to think more about what that community's relationship is with Salem, and whether they'll even be able to answer the survey, because are they conducting business or working or living in Salem? And I don't know what percentage of that community fulfills those requirements for the survey. So that'd be my only reaction to that, because Marion County is also is reflecting Woodburn, obviously, not just Salem, when we're looking at the data. The third most spoken language is Chinese in Marion County. I don't know. We haven't really gotten a lot of requests. I think another thing that should guide us too, and I don't know, I don't have answers, is how many people in the community don't speak English.
Right.
Obviously with Spanish, a lot of us don't speak English. My family who's here, most of my family is in Mexico, but I have aunts and uncles here who've been here for 30 years and don't speak a word of English, and so that makes a lot of sense to have the Spanish language. I think Jackie's desire to have these translations comes from a similar place, which is, if we don't have the translations, we really don't have access to the insights this community has to offer, because a lot of them don't, maybe are not English dominant, or don't speak a lot of English. And so that to me is another motivation, is how many of these, again, I don't have answers, but how many of these Chinese speaking community doesn't speak English, or similarly for the Russian community. I just don't know the answer to those questions. But when we're thinking about, I know that our budget is for the whole city is kind of dire at the moment, and if our purse is very tight, thinking about those things too would be really important. I think, even if it's not the second or third most populous language, how much of it is, what's the actual demand? That's my question.
I recall at one point, the American Community Survey, I thought, had a question about, do you speak English less than very well?
Oh,
Is, I think, how they would phrase it. And you could cross that with the language a person did speak, and that might help us get there. I'll have to take another look, or that might help us zero in.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do that right now.
Yeah,
I can look at that.
No, I think that might
I went
be
to type it and I was like,
it might
I'm
be a
not-
choice though. Yeah.
But that might give us some insight here. But I think the Marshallese and the Chukis are a good starting point to continue entertaining those. Any other thoughts on the language question in particular?
I have one other translation comment, but it's a little bit in a different direction.
Please.
I feel like from an efficiency standpoint, to go through the questionnaire and finalize it in English and then just have it translated is very efficient. I don't know that I necessarily feel like it's the most effective or the most culturally aware. For example, the gender question, historically, English-speaking researchers have used male and female with some other options. But I read a year or two ago, considering the Spanish translation, man and woman translated better. And so I have started using man and woman in my English, because that facilitates a comparable translation to Spanish, where for primarily Spanish speakers, having man and woman in the gender question makes more sense or feels more natural. I don't know culturally if there are things from a Marshallese standpoint or a Cherokee standpoint or a Russian standpoint. And Joaquin, from a Spanish culture standpoint, there may be other things here when you were translating it. You're like, that's kind of weird in Spanish if we adjusted it like this. could we also just adjust the English? Because it's not really weird in English. A and B both are fine. But I guess I just want to put on the table where we have time.
Yeah.
Maybe instead of saying, this is the English, go translate it the best you can, we say, we've done the best we can with English, but hey, translators, as you're translating, like, we would adjust the English if that made the questionnaire work better culturally across the different languages and cultures we're reaching out to. Does that make sense?
It does. And I will tell you that I did that when I translated. I did not change the English, of course, because it makes perfect sense in English. But there are just some words or the way you'd phrase things or things that you just wouldn't say that way in Spanish. And that is reflected in my translation in Spanish too. And some of that variation is national. I mean, I speak Spanish. I have a very heavy Southern Mexican accent in Spanish, and that's my cultural upbringing. And so there's a bias there too. But I think that's a very good point. And ultimately, for other languages, I won't be able to speak to that. So what are you recommending? I guess is just to go through them and say, this is what we have for now in English, or what are you recommending?
I think that's my recommendation. I like that for now. This is what we have for now in English. But as we reach out to the translators, if we could communicate to them, we're going to collect the data and we want it to be apples to apples with different languages and cultural considerations. But we want to have enough flexibility for the translators and know that we want, option A needs to be the same, but if you're going to say in Spanish, it really needs to be worded this way, but if I code it the same, that's what makes sense. I don't know if the translators would want to come back and say, here's what I did, or is this okay? Or if we just say, we want you to use your linguistic knowledge, but also your cultural knowledge to help this questionnaire make sense to the people that are going to access it.
Because obviously, I think if the spirit of the question is legible, that's what matters. That to me is the apples to apple, not so much that it's verbatim what they said in English as it literally syntactically the same. You know what I mean? You think that's fair?
Yes.
So I think even like, for example, in gender inclusive language, very different in Spanish and still emerging. And I mean, there's gender in Spanish in a way that is not true in English, and it's an ongoing debate. But for example, if you very common to use Latinx in English because it's an English word, but most Spanish speakers who only speak Spanish have never heard the word Latinx. And so if we're using Latinx in Spanish, they'd be like, what is that? What is Latinx? What does that mean? So and even alternatives like Latine are still very new and kind of academic and esoteric. It's not really in the language. And so, having to be more, to your point, culturally appropriate, I think is an important thing. Okay. Should we just go through it and see what's what? I think a lot of it is going to be the same. I think questions I'd like to ask folks to think about it before we start is just, I know we did this going in, but let's do it again now. Why is this question here? What use does it have? How has it changed in years past? A lot of them haven't, a lot of them have. What kind of information are we getting? Are we identifying gaps in the things that we want to know, and those kind of questions? And it should be pretty smooth, but worth doing, I think. Does that sound good for folks?
Yes.
Professor, do you want to go through the questions, or do you want me to go through the questions, or do you want? How do we want to do this?
Whatever you prefer.
I have no
Gretchen had
preference.
attached the PDF of the hard copy questionnaire, just so we're all working from the same document. I don't know if it's helpful if someone shares their screen so we're looking at the same thing, or if that's appropriate to do when we're doing YouTube.
Can we do
up
that
on my
on
screen.
Zoom when it's broadcasted, Gretchen?
We can do that. Would you like me to open it and do that?
I think so. That's a good
Great.
idea.
Seems
Sure.
helpful.
I would offer, but I don't know how.
Yeah, just a sec. I'm happy to do that.
Health
Good
is always
thinking.
laughing at my technological literacy, and I don't know how to take that. But
I love that you
I
are
take it
so
well.
honest.
I mean, it's true. I don't know how to do anything.
Well, I, in theory, know how to do it, but I feel like half the time when I go to do it in front of a group, I'm like, oh, wait, where's the button?
Yeah, I
Which
know.
one? I don't know where it went.
And then something invariably goes wrong. They can't hear you, you can't see them. This toggling's not working. It's frozen. I think it just best if Gretchen does it.
No matter how many times you use it, there will
Yeah.
always be something that you're like, never seen that before.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, I got step 1 done, which was I found the document and got it open.
Okay.
Perfect.
Step 2 is now to share the screen and choose the right screen to share. Let's see.
That's the one that always gets me.
Also, when we go into this thing, I mean, this is kind of goes without saying because we're very collaborative here. But just if I can't see you or you can't see us, just talk. I mean, it's just feel totally empowered to do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Do
So
we want to focus just on the questions?
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, if we have time, maybe we can revisit the top. But let's get to the questions.
And I'll chime in as we start. The first 2 questions are what we call screening questions. So in the online version, if somebody comes on through a Facebook link or an emailed link and they mark that they're under 18, then immediately the questionnaire will say, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah.
You're done. And that is because not that we don't care about minors, but doing survey research like this, there's some specific ethical guidelines around doing research with minors. And I have just said for my students, for my class, so we don't have to deal with an internal review board or look at the complications of doing research with minors, we will only collect this data from people 18 and up. So this question comes right at the beginning. When we're out doing the hard copies, which what we're looking at is a hard copy one, it's kind of weird to have that be the very first question. And a lot of times when I've been, standing at the corner in Arches parking lot, talking to folks, I can tell most of them are over 18 and I don't ask it until I'm asking the other demographics at the end and I go back and mark it. But the age question is here, it's first. It's a screening question and to just make sure that we're doing research with people 18 and up.
So the way you phrase that raises something for me. I always assumed people were taking it like you handed it to them and they filled it out. Is that not correct? Or you said that you don't ask the question. Does that mean that you're asking the question?
So when we are out, we do it however people
Okay.
want.
Mhm.
And some people
Got it.
I say, hey, here's a clipboard and a survey and a pencil, sit down and read it and mark this.
Got it.
Some people just want to talk to us and we say, we're doing this survey. Here's some of our questions. Sometimes I'll stand right next to somebody and read it, but sometimes we just kind of start talking. And because that's how it ends up happening, it is a different experience than someone who's actually doing it online.
Got it.
And for example, and I'm getting ahead of myself here, but in question 3, we have like the A statement and the B statement. And when people are doing those online, they see them on the same screen. And that's very easy to make that comparison and be like, oh yes, someone like me, I strongly agree. Everybody, that's only so-so for me. But standing on the street corner, talking to people or even handing them that, I found that the differentiation between those 2 statements, it was very tricky. So if we want the in-person experience, when we first went out, it was like we were really doing this as online, and then we added the hard copy to extend the opportunity to increase the access, but it was primarily an online survey. And if you're saying, hey, the data from the unsheltered population is becoming more and more important in this work, then I would say we really probably want to adjust, like question 3. I would say we should just ask one of those because it's too tricky standing in the street to really process the difference between the 2. And I would ask it. I was like, okay, but is that for someone like you and then everyone? But having 2 of them, it's a different experience online and out in the field.
Do folks have reactions to that?
I don't know if it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but the first year that we did print the hard copies and Linnell went out and got a bunch. I think she tried to have people fill it out on their own, but she discovered that the literacy levels were quite variable. And so I think that's how we kind of shifted to doing it. Talking to them, but because at the times I've done it, I have filled it out. I've been saying next to them so they can see what I'm doing, but I'm marking it on the clipboard for them. And I didn't do it this last year, so I don't know how these questions, but what Marianne is saying makes sense, that it flows differently depending on how the method that you're taking it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question, Joaquin, but
Yeah, I don't know what I was looking for. I think I think we're always looking to cut down too in length. So, I mean, this might be a juncture where we can entertain the idea of cutting one of these questions. And so that'd be for both, I'm assuming, for the in-person and the online, just for consistency's sake. First of all, is that, we don't have to decide right now, but is that something people are interested in? And if so, which of these questions could you see go? And I think asking yourself, what are we getting by asking this question or these questions? Do we want to keep getting this information? What are we learning from it?
Yeah, I guess, like, are we wanting, because this is kind of getting at perception. Are we wanting information about, like, how do people perceive Salem? Or are we wanting, like, their experience? I err on the, like, I think experience. They're both helpful. But I think the experience is a little bit more relevant to the work that we do.
I'd be inclined, if I had to choose between these two questions, I'd be inclined to keep the first one and drop the second one, because we want to know more about what like what Kelsey said, what their experience is. I mean, as far as it being welcoming for people of all identities and demographics, I don't think anyone can say that without some degree of speculation. I don't know.
I would agree. I feel like if it's welcoming for all identities and demographics, what people say has a lot to do with their own perspective.
Mhm.
And we don't know that about them. So it's their perception. But I would assume if it's welcoming for someone like me, that's going to be more informed by my own experience. And we will have demographics about that person. So we could then also split this, Q3A by those demographics.
Yeah, I think I also have maybe two more things to add on to that. It's not very, I don't know what it reveals about anything, actually, because it's like, I mean, I know we included it this year, but I'm thinking about it now, but I mean, the answer has to be no, because not everyone is welcome in every space ever. And so, and we also, and again, it's very subjective. What are we learning? Because we do ask later, my second point is we ask later, how often do you experience or witness discrimination happening to other people? As opposed to how often do you personally experience it on a ongoing basis, right? And that to me is actually numerically revealing. I see discrimination on this basis happening once a week in the streets of Salem when I'm downtown or wherever you may be, is much more revelatory than I agree that Salem is welcome to everybody. Just from a utility perspective, I think that is maybe another reaction I'd have. Go ahead, Kathy.
So did we add this question with the shift from going away from a survey about discrimination and focusing more on the community belonging? Is that where this question?
Yeah, that's exactly.
I think so,
And
yeah.
so the idea was to add kind of a more general perception question around belonging. instead of a specific discrimination experience or observation. And maybe there's a different kind of question about belonging that we would rather switch it to, but I'm hearing very persuasive reasons to cut one of them and probably the second.
What are people's reactions to, I like the Salem is welcoming community for someone like me, strongly disagree or strongly agree. If we're trying to again kind of center this welcoming thing, which is right, I think, and the shift that we made this year, thoughts on like maybe how often do you feel that you're, well, I don't know if that works. How often do you feel, I guess that's welcoming. I was gonna say, how often do you feel like celebrated in Salem? That makes, that's a bad question. But you know what I'm saying? It's more than just welcome. It's like, how often do you feel really valued and feel like that who you are is contributing to Salem? Actually, ignore that. Let's just move on. That was a horrible idea. I was just talking out loud. That was not good.
Joaquin, this is Gretchen. Not horrible. I appreciate where you're coming from. You know, there's really a continuum of belonging, isn't there? There's tolerance and there's celebration, and those are really different things. And I can appreciate where you're coming from.
Gretchen, you're very diplomatic and generous.
Joaquin, I'm
Bless you.
celebrating you. Do you see the reaction? I think you're great. You're valued. You're appreciated. I'm going to celebrate you with birthday hats over
Yeah,
here.
well, I appreciate that. Anyways, let's just maybe take that as a comment and let's just move on. But thank you for entertaining that, everybody. So okay, then let's just get a sense of it. Do folks feel like maybe we're at eliminating Q3B, question 3B? I'm getting a thumbs up from Kelsey. I'm getting a preliminary nod from Kathy. I got a thumbs up from Marianne. Okay, let's just do that then.
The reason my nod is yes, but I kind of don't want to necessarily say that without seeing what we do with the rest of the questions.
Okay, then let's just
Back.
flag it then and
Yeah.
okay, that's good.
May I interrupt real quick with a housekeeping question?
Yeah.
Marianne, I don't know if I have this document in Word. Oh, wait, I think I can. Sorry, I'm showing my tech goofiness. I think I can edit PDF. I was going to say that I'm happy to track all of this and send you a revision. And I believe I can edit this document. I might need to hit you up for an editable version.
I think that I have a Word copy somewhere.
I think I do too. If you can't,
Oh,
and
find
I
one
think the
then.
PDF, editing PDFs doesn't always work very well.
Well, I appreciate that. If someone has a Word version, that would be easier on me.
You can also comment on the PDF, or if that's fine too.
Well, and I specifically printed it since I had a PDF so I could take notes. So if we don't get it all in the document tonight, I can get it in a future version. But let me see if I can find a Word version.
And I'm making notes of all the changes, so I don't want you to worry about that. I'm taking all the notes tonight. I just,
Oh, you're awesome.
yeah, no, I got notes. Don't worry about that.
Process question also. I mean, we're reviewing this now, but the students that will be in this class when the survey is given, are they also going to have the opportunity to comment and make suggestions for questions? I mean, we haven't done that before where we've said, this is it, you're stuck with it. And so I just wanted
Yeah,
to-
I think it's a really great part of the learning process for them to think about what makes a good questionnaire. And I typically, the second class, have had the opportunity for people from the Human Rights Commission to say, here's our objective, here's what we're hoping to learn. And then I sit with the students and say, here's the questionnaire from a previous year, like go through it as if you respondents and give feedback. I am happy. I feel like with the timeline to be able to get the translation pieces in place that we need, we do really need to, we can't wait until April to say, okay, students, you have a free reign to rewrite this. But I do think it's plausible that between now and then, there will be something that comes on your radar screen that you say, ooh, can we add one question? Or, ooh, we're asking this and we want to change this answer option. I would hope that the revisions would be pretty minor, so it wouldn't be a big ask or a heavy lift for us to go back to the translators and say, we have these 3 tweaks.
Mm.
But I would like the students to go through it. And I am comfortable to say to them, this is the process I did in the fall with the HRC to build on last year's questionnaire so you can with confidence field this one. I think that given the timeline constraints, that's kind of my ideal process.
Okay, okay.
I totally agree, Marianne. And I'll just clarify, and if I wasn't clear enough at the opening, is just that this conversation and the ones to follow comes from a place of, translating
Right.
the whole thing,
Right.
even the month of is kind of burdensome. And just not to have that. That's one of the lessons that I learned from this last one was, we did it like in the days leading up to it. And it was too much. So it was fine, but I wouldn't want that again for other people. And just having an English version where we can say to translators, leading up to the spring, here's what we have to work with. It might change a little bit, but this is really the spirit of what we have is what we're hoping to get is these conversations. So,
Okay.
But it doesn't change us going to the class and meeting with them, and at least it doesn't to my mind. So,
Right.
But good question. Gretchen, I only have a PDF, not a Word doc. I'm sorry.
Copy. Thank you.
I looked. Okay, next question. So these are the discrimination questions about witnessing someone else's discrimination in the last year, I think it was. Yes, no skips a bunch of questions. And then, so I think I'm just gonna make the executive, we're gonna keep that. And then my question for us here today is, obviously we thought long and hard about these identities and categories. Are there other ones we'd like to see represented? I don't know if I'd be inclined to eliminate any of them, but I'm open to that. But specifically, are there things folks were like, I wish we had gotten information on this? Or
I will also just throw out that the combined ones like race/color/national origin, as well as marital status/parental/familial status. In past years, we had split those. Felt like this year, especially with the branching, that having fewer here was beneficial, and that those would be okay combined. But if, as you have presented data, if you've said, oh, I wish those were separate, or I wish that we had included this other one, weight or body type is one that in an early version, we didn't have it, but we had quite a few people type it in with the other please specify.
Oh.
And this year there weren't any things typed in that consistently came up that I was like, oh, maybe we need to add that. So it's a long list, but I have a hard time recommending to take any of them off and having the ones combined. I felt like from my perspective that worked. As long as you all feel good about that, then I think this list is probably a good one.
Yeah, and thank you for reminding me of the comment. I forgot that we talked about combining those different ones. That's a good reminder. I personally felt good about it. I felt good about, I think another one we talked about long and hard was, or maybe it was during the editing process, but Gretchen and Marianne I talked about it. It was the physical disability and the mental disability being different categories. That was a conversation that we had.
Mhm.
I would be personally inclined to keeping it as is, 2 different categories. I think those are really, obviously the continuum of disability experience is a unifying thing, but in practice, I think they're very different. I think the forms of discrimination that you experience are different, and therefore they warrant being separate, but open to a conversation about that too. That was
I
the other
also
big one.
recall
Yeah.
Joaquin, you and Alejandra had some discussions about the translation for weight or body type. And
Yeah,
that
that's
would
right.
be one also that maybe culturally, like that wording in English, it kind of comes from what people wrote in. But if you said, hey, when we translate it to Spanish, this is what really makes sense. So we should adjust the English a little bit.
Yeah.
That might be one to consider our wording.
Yes, and I think it's challenging, not just in the wording, but again, hard to generalize, but I would say generally there's a different relationship to weight and body size in the Latino culture than in kind of the more Anglo culture. So that's another thing that kind of plays into how we word things. Yeah, I'll have to think about that, but I wouldn't, I think in terms of the English version, keeping it is great.
Right.
Okay, do we feel good to move on here? I don't want to belabor anything too much if we don't have to. Would you mind toggling down whomever is in charge of that? I forgot who even was. Gretchen, I think it
Okay,
was.
You're doing
that's me.
great.
I'm on it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How often do you witness or hear about others experiencing discrimination? This kind of also relates. It makes me feel better about cutting the other question, maybe a little bit. Kathy, I'm looking to you, but but okay. So this is rarely, occasionally, monthly, weekly, daily. I read those backwards, I think maybe. But thoughts on these timeframes in this question generally? Useful? No thoughts are fine. I'm taking no thoughts as a endorsement of it.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Yeah. And that's fine too. We don't have, again, I don't really feel comfortable making drastic changes, but I think having this conversation is good. So if it's keeping it, it's keeping it, and that's just fine by me. Question 7, past year, in what places? This was a big one. At least for me, it was a big one. I talk about it a lot. This was a big one for me, which was, where have you heard about discrimination happening in Salem? And we had many back and forth over several months around where we wanted to hear people's experiences, or whatever, however you phrase that in English. So let's think about that. Obviously, I guess maybe one question I have for you, Professor, is were there any others that were really noticeable?
Off the top of my head, I don't recall anything. I will look that up
I don't either.
specifically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would appreciate that. I should, again, I was at work all day, but I don't remember any that really come to mind for me. But some things to think about was we did have a last minute change to the healthcare setting. I can't remember what that change was now. I'm looking at it and nothing is striking me, but we did change something last minute about the healthcare setting. And did anybody remember what that was? Marianne? Gretchen,
I
I'm looking
remember
at
the
you.
lthink minute conversations about the housing, but not the healthcare.
Is
I
that what
also don't recall.
Okay, well, maybe I'm just making it up from my head. I think that was a while there. I was dreaming about it. So just for the sake of reading, okay. So there was businesses, church. I might amend church to places of worship, because church is a little Christian coded, which is fine, but
I have that same question, like, or faith-based organization or place of
yeah,
worship.
yeah. I will say I think the distinction is maybe a little bit material. Places of worship to me invokes church, synagogues, houses of religion, as opposed to things that are simply associated with faith. You know what I mean? Like, does that make sense? Is that a relevant distinction, you think?
I like places of worship better. Let's switch it.
Mhm.
Okay. So that's one note. Government office or agency. If anything, maybe just listing examples of what that might look like if folks are lost there, or maybe would like some more clarity. I don't really feel either way about it. Healthcare settings, we specified doctors' offices, hospitals, pharmacies. That was a big one, if folks remember. That was a huge, and government offices too, was a big one too.
What
The
about
1, 2, and 3,
social
number
service?
1 was public outdoor spaces, number 2 was businesses, and number 3 was healthcare.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry, someone said something and I don't know who it was.
It was me, Kathy. What
Yeah.
about service providers? Like I think somebody made some comments about arches and places like that. I don't
Hmm.
know which one of these I would choose if that was my experience. So is that something to add?
So as Joaquin was reading, suddenly I went, oh, the thing that we heard in the other was, and the word the students came back with was nonprofits, but service provider is probably a better phrasing, but where people did witness. And so they're like, well, it's not really a
Yeah.
government.
Mhm.
And I don't know if they would have considered it as an agency. So I guess if we want those clumped, we could give both examples, but a government office and service provider, we definitely
I think that's
saw,
an important.
typed in and heard people tell us
Yeah.
that.
I
Could
think
it
it's
maybe
really-
be like community-based nonprofit or community-based service provider?
I like that.
I don't, to me, nonprofit doesn't quite get there. For at least for what I have in my mind.
Yeah, sure.
What did
Would
you have in
you-
mind, Kathy?
Well, more, I mean, like the service providers. I
Yeah.
don't think, I don't know, people are necessarily going to distinguish, was it a non, I don't know if it's I don't know if it's a nonprofit. I just know that I went there to get services and had this experience, you know,
Or saw the person in line in front of me, or I was
Yeah.
with a friend.
yeah.
And people might not know what service provider means off the top of their head, so that might be a listing situation where we list examples of that,
Yeah,
inclu-
like
including
with
nonprofits.
examples.
Or,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think we want to list any names.
No.
no, I mean just category of thing like
Arch.
nonprofit or. Yeah, that's not what I meant to say, but you know what I meant.
Especially since we'll list examples, would it be its own bullet or choice?
I think community-based service provider or service providers, for example, housing supports,
Yeah.
food pantry. I mean, I think if we could identify some types of
Mhm,
service providers.
mhm.
I also think that it would be interesting, including that, how it would impact government office. I wonder how it would impact other ways, you know what I mean? I wonder how people are putting down other
Yeah,
things when they're thinking of this other thing, you know what I mean?
yeah.
I mean, you
Especially
could
for the
include
in-house.
shelter as as one of the
Yeah.
examples.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Housing, finding housing, getting repairs. Online with a local group or neighbor. I don't remember including that one, but that's a good add-on, the online community. Public transportation. I'll have to pay more attention to that now, won't I, Gretchen? I'll have to really look at that one. Public outdoor spaces, schools, work, other, those feel pretty intuitive to me. Do you feel good about those?
When I first looked at the data, what was interesting to me was I was looking at like how frequently were each of these checked. And the smaller ones, you know, not everybody who completed the survey spends time in a school or goes to a place of worship. And so it was a little tricky because some of the lower checked ones, you know, for example, public transportation, not everyone who did the survey takes public transportation. So they wouldn't have even had an opportunity to witness or hear about discrimination there. And so it was, you know, everybody will spend time in a park or a street. Everybody goes to some businesses. And there was a little part of me as I looked at the data that wondered, like, are those scoring the highest because those are the ones that everybody spends time in?
Mhm.
And did like public transportation came up low, but I'm like, well, maybe only 20% of the respondents take public transportation. So if 100% of the people who take public transportation have witnessed discrimination there, it's still going to show up low in this question.
Mhm.
So
I think
that's
I
a
think-
little
yeah.
challenging in the way we're asking it.
It is, and I think also just squaring it with things like reports we get from the lieutenant every month around, we know there's a lot of discrimination happening on campuses and around schools, but we're not maybe getting that in the survey. I mean, I don't know literally what it is, but I would say, you know, over half of the reports we get are happening in or around schools, often by even school age people. And so that's another thing to keep in mind is kind of balancing those two competing realities, right? Okay, any other places? So we can, I want to be mindful of time because it's already almost 8 o'clock. I know we go till 8:15, but I don't want to drag on forever. I feel comfortable moving on, I think. Same thing, but it's all about you now. Last 12 months, yes, no, same list of things. I feel good about moving on. 12 months in the last year, how often have you experienced discrimination based on housing status? I did not. Rarely, occasionally, monthly, weekly, daily.
So I'm just going to comment on question 10 and 11. In the hard copy, we only ask those about housing status. So how often did you experience based on housing status, and in what places based on housing status? If, I'm sitting with someone on the street and they say, I've never experienced discrimination based on housing status, then I have the I did not and I did not here I can mark.
Yeah.
Online, we did the branching.
Yeah.
So if I said I experienced discrimination on the basis of gender identity, and housing status, then I see the how often and the place question for each of those three that I checked. And if online I didn't check housing status, this housing status question that you're seeing in the hard copy doesn't show up at all. Only the types of discrimination I checked that I've experienced show up online. So we felt like in the hard copy, trying to do that branching was too complex. We certainly spoke with people experiencing homelessness who indicated they have experienced discrimination on the basis of more than one of these categories or types, but we only ask them in hard copy about housing status.
Yeah. And that was a practicality constraint.
Yeah.
For the in-person thing, which we can talk about and kind of revisit, but I don't really see that changing next year.
It just, when you're connecting with somebody and saying, hey, would you talk to me for a few minutes?
Yeah.
I mean, just the number of pages and the time, it would be too daunting. And if we felt like we really needed to ask everybody for
Yeah.
any type that they marked, we would have to consider, do we carry iPads to actually do it electronically? Or I
Yeah.
know Linnell sat with some people at Safe Sleep, and instead of doing the hard copy, she actually just sat at the computer with them and did the data entry as they talked. In which case, so we do have some people who are currently experiencing homelessness who answered all of those because Linnell did it online with them,
Yeah.
which is great. But I think from a hard copy standpoint, we just can't ask all the branches. So
I think the loss really, of course, is that intersection of hard copy but not unhoused. That's the loss. But I guess that direction there would just be maybe if they have access to a phone or a computer, they can take it there, and if they don't, they don't, or if they don't want to, then we can do it on hard copy. But
we had very few hard copies, but not unhoused, and some of them, to be honest, were service providers as we were there.
yeah,
I mean, I didn't want to say to anybody, well, you can't do it.
yeah,
So, but it was very few.
yeah. I feel comfortable. I mean, right now it's like 2 pages or something like that. That to me is ideal. I wouldn't, even 3 pages would be getting too long. People may not take it or complete it.
Well, it's 4 front and back, so it's on 2 pages. Sorry, my dog's very excited.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, 4 pages. I stand corrected, but at any rate, it's not endless. So,
Right.
do folks feel comfortable keeping it that way, or
Mhm.
we're getting nods?
Yeah, you don't want it to get too long.
Yeah.
People are gonna be really discouraged and not
Yeah.
want to bother to take the time.
Let's see. The next one, about you and others, exclamation mark. Overall, how would you rate the level of discrimination in Salem? The ratings are, I don't know, or I don't want to say, failing, poor, average, good, or excellent. That seems intuitive to me. Reactions? I
Is
guess the
this-
question here would be, is this a question we want to keep?
Yeah, I was thinking, is this the same kind of on the same lines of like perception? So like I think if I would be comfortable cutting it.
So I am too open to that, Kelsey. I think 2 things. This is actually the discrimination side, I think, of the other question that we cut earlier. So I actually would be almost inclined to keep one of them if we really wanted to. Because I know that a lot of the, not there's an excess of reporting about the survey, but reporting that does happen often leads with, people consider Salem failing on discrimination, and that's like the headline they run with. So it is relevant and legible to somebody. And I think maybe it is at some level useful to some people, including maybe even policymakers. And we can kind of have it as a lead into a larger conversation. So I'm not saying it, I don't say it is subjective. It's a lot like the other question we cut, but I don't know if it has no value. And if we're going to keep one of them, maybe this one, maybe the other one, but maybe cutting one of the two might be something we talk about.
I will chime in on this question that it is one that I feel like as we're kind of trying to summarize what we learned,
Yeah.
it's kind of a summary question. It's kind of my overall perception is this. And if you think of those rainbow charts where we looked at like the ages and the genders and identities and the race and ethnicity and the housing status, we took this question and said, okay, what's the average for that category, and did all those comparisons. And if you would rather do that for it's a welcoming community for someone like me, like I think we need kind of an overall perception summary question that we're going to compare, like younger people feel like Salem is more welcoming, or younger people rate Salem for the level of discrimination better than older people. Like you kind of need an overall summary perception question. I'm not convinced that this is the very best wording. And maybe you want it to be my perception of, is it welcoming for someone like me? This also is a question that we haven't changed for the last couple of years. So I know sometimes people are like, oh, you've done this for how many years? How does the data compare? This is one that we have been able to compare a little bit year to year. It's the awareness and this one are really the ones we've compared. So for whatever it's worth, this is one that we've had kind of as an anchor in our analysis in the past couple of years.
I would keep this one over the other one for the reasons that Marianne just mentioned.
I also think that the verbatim comments that people type in after this question, because we say, well, why did you choose that? A lot of those comments are pretty rich, that they're like, oh, I chose it because I had this terrible experience, or I chose that because I don't ever see any discrimination here, or I chose it because I'm white. I mean, people literally have typed that in. And I think those comments are illuminating.
Mm-hmm.
I feel moved to keep it. It does raise a question for me, though. I like that it's at the end. And that makes me ask whether what was the first question?
Salem is a welcoming community for someone like me.
It's making me reconsider the placement of that question. If maybe it should also be at the end. Not that I want a negativity bias, but if that question comes after you've considered all these other things, maybe you might say, yeah, it is for me. But then you think about everything after you've gone through the survey and you're like, yeah, kind of, I just think, I don't know, the placement of that question might be important to think about.
It's a little bit of an academic consideration.
Well, I've never been known for those. That's for sure.
Well, thanks for being true to character.
Yeah.
A lot of times people recommend an overall rating question come early, because if I say Salem is a welcome community for someone like me, and the reason I feel that way is, A, B, and C, and then you go ask me a bunch of questions about discrimination, but that doesn't really inform how welcoming I feel like Salem is. If you lead me through your questionnaire and thought process, then that may actually influence my response to that overall perception question more than we want it to.
Yeah, that would be the concern. I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, no, it's something to definitely think about.
Okay, in the last few minutes here, let's try to go through the last few questions and see if we're going to get through the survey here. Again, this is just not the last conversation on this. We just want to have it now. Oh my gosh, I need new glasses. HRC awareness. This is also a question that we've asked in the past, or some flavor of it. Were you aware before the survey that the City of Salem has a Human Rights Commission? Yes or no? Our perception, our awareness went down this year. I don't think it was just dramatic in terms of total numbers, but the percentage I think was kind of dramatic. It was I don't remember what it was. I can't remember. How did you learn of, sweetheart? I am in a meeting. Just give me a few minutes, okay?
We're just on the end.
All right. I love you. Sorry about that. How did you learn about it? And that would be at school, work, newspaper, website, social media, personal interaction, past survey, other. Do folks feel okay about keeping that question, first of all, and then second of all, the options for how we heard about us?
I would ask you, is the data from 15 useful? I feel like it's not a question that on the back end people really talk about, but you're not going to necessarily present that to the council if that's internally.
I think it is
saying,
useful
well, then
for
we ought to
us.
go do more of this.
Yeah. I would say yes. I would say it is
Right.
useful. Especially for this task force, which is interested in engaging with the public, what's working, what isn't working. We won't have time for the next agenda item, but it would, for example, directly relate to our conversation about that.
Perfect.
So, but yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
Sorry, I would want to go back and look how many times have these options been so I don't know how someone would learn about the Human Rights Commission at school. I mean, maybe I'm just not thinking of it, but I think maybe we should add events. I mean, those events that, if they learned about it, it's at Pride or at wherever we were tabling.
I'm surprised we didn't include that this year because that's a huge part of what we do, right? Or at least try to do, is go to the World Beat.
Good catch, Cappy.
Yeah.
Jeez.
That right there is the benefit of these check-ins. So thank you, Kathy.
I'll pull the data on this one, Kathy, and if there's some that are low,
If there's some that nobody's ever checked,
like
then maybe
school,
yeah.
check that one. Yeah,
And maybe that's a problem. Maybe people should be learning about us at school, and that could be an
except
indication
that
of,
you have to be 18 to complete the survey. So I don't know how many people learned about it in, I mean, I guess,
University,
right?
college.
I mean, we don't have current high school students taking this.
Yeah.
that's
I guess
true.
I could have learned about it in high school
And then taking the survey later.
and then taking the survey 10 years later.
We did a community forum at Chemeketa Community College in 2014.
Okay.
But we haven't done a lot at the schools or universities in recent years. It's a good point.
I mean, maybe we should,
Yeah.
especially public, like Chemeketa would be a great one, right? A lot of them are local folks. Willamette, I don't know. I don't know how local Willamette is. Well, no. I mean, Willamette's great. I love Willamette. I'm saying the students who might be more involved in the community, who would be local. I don't know what portion of the Willamette.
I think we
classes.
have 2 HRC members who are students at Willamette. We have Zeke, and then one other. So
Oh,
let's,
Mhm.
I think we can use that.
okay. There you go.
Ooh.
But definitely, we're reaching out to Chemeketa, which we already have a relationship with Chemeketa. So Gretchen, you forward to us all of these things that
Yes.
I definitely read
Cultural
and know
competency.
everything about.
We do.
Yeah. Okay, good. Survey awareness. How did you find the survey? Quickly, City of Salem Facebook page, Instagram, website, or email. Organization or group posted or emailed about it. Friend, family, send it to me. I was given a paper or other. Anything?
We
Glenn?
have used this one more from a survey administration standpoint.
Yeah.
And we've cut the data because we had previous years where we only did it with the City of Salem Facebook page, Instagram, website, or email. So then we can take those who answered it, who got it that way, and compare them to past years of people who got it that way.
Yeah.
So that's why it's there.
And I think mostly people who do it online do it from the Facebook page. Is that right?
Most of them.
Yeah.
Although get the organization of the Fronter family is definitely a big part of it too.
Yeah. And that's something that in our future conversations as we approach the spring, I'd like to talk about, which I've already talked about, but being more proactive about that, especially for the Spanish speaking community and later maybe the Russian community and other language based communities. Good. Bias crime. He said cheerfully, if you were the target of a bias crime, how comfortable would you be in reporting it to the Salem Police Department? This was a super important question for us this year, and is informing a lot of our conversations moving forward, ranging from prefer not to say very comfortable to very uncomfortable.
My
Thoughts on this
only
question?
feedback on this is, it seemed to me, and I could be wrong, but it seemed to me with comparing the free text answers, I think some people might have flipped it, like they answered it one way, but then when they explained their answer, they actually meant the other. And so I don't know if there's any way we can make the question. I don't know if
You
it's
mean in the Excel responses that document all the comments? I noticed that too, Kathy. Yeah.
like maybe they assumed that the first option was very comfortable as opposed to very uncomfortable. I don't know. I don't know much about, the best way to have those options ordered, but just so we're sure that they're answering it accurately and not the opposite of what they intended to say.
Yes.
And that actually raises something, just to add on to that, for me, Marianne, which is typically when I see these, I maybe there's no typical because I don't know anything about it and you're the expert, but often when I see these things, they are lined up horizontally. And I don't see that here. And I'm wondering, not that it's confusing, but if the options accompany a visual representation of the options, if that would help, or that maybe that's not feasible or not, whatever. But is there a reason in particular that it's bulleted in the way that it is?
In the hard copy, it's because it was what fit on the page.
Got it.
On the online version, it
scaled.
looks different.
Yeah.
There are different ways you can present the scale, and we can definitely, there's so many sliders and thermometer. There's lots of ways you can put them on the page. I feel like it's really important that we consistently either go low to high or high to low.
Yeah.
So it's like the most negative to the most positive in every question.
Yeah.
So they do all go the same direction. And for the students, Qualtrics puts a number. So it's 1 to 5.
Yeah.
And if you do low to high, then your averages match up, your lowest, it will average and be oh, most people were very uncomfortable. And so that's the average is going to be between 1 and 2. But if you put the strongly agree or the very comfortable first, then the averages are all switched from what's intuitive. So with student surveys, I usually just have them go most negative to most positive. So when they're dealing with the analysis, it's easiest. We can explore different visual representations, and we have lots of options with the online version. And we did try if they were all in one row or in one stack, but there's visuals. And I think especially if we get the wording, that could be something that we say to the students, explore this and try it different ways. And then we need to be consistent in how we present it. I also feel like sometimes people mark the somewhat uncomfortable and then they write a very negative comment about why they were somewhat, instead of very comfortable, they'll say I was somewhat comfortable, but then they'll say, well, here's all the reasons why I was only somewhat and not very. So it reads as a very negative comment because it's explaining why they were 4 instead of 5. So sometimes I do think I'll read something and I was like, whoa. And then it is, as I've talked to people, it's well, I didn't give them a 5, I give them a 4. So I'm telling you all the things that were negative to explain that. But I will look at these open ends and I'll work with the students to say, we've got to use a 5-point scale every time. So we're consistent, and go low to high every time. So we're consistent. But how it actually visually presents on the page in the hard copy and visually presents online, we have lots of options, so we can explore that to improve it.
Thank you. Kelsey, go ahead, and then I will get us out of here in the next 2 minutes because we've gone 5 minutes over.
I know I have had some surveys gotten some feedback that the very or the somewhat isn't super helpful. Because one, people have like different definitions of that. Like, what is that telling us? Are we more interested in the like, whether they feel comfortable or uncomfortable or neither? So I would be interested in kind of looking at that Likert scale. Like, are we wanting to do that 5-point or that like 3-point or whatever?
Yeah. And that, again, we don't have to rush to decide that right now. We don't have time for that, but I think that's definitely something, Professor, for you to think about it for our next conversation. It just
Yeah.
as it from a utility
Absolutely.
point of
Maybe-
view.
Oh, sorry. Have 5 points, but only label 3 of them. You know, like very, very comfortable, very uncomfortable, very comfortable, neither, but then still have the middle points so people, I don't know if that's a way to do things or not.
That also occurs to me, I defer to you, Marianne, but I wonder if that's the sort of thing that the students could engage on, because that would be kind of a minor impact to the translation.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But kind of a major impact to how we experience the survey. So maybe that's a good opportunity for them. I'm not sure.
Well, and once we decide on that, I mean, it has a cascading impact. It's one decision that will affect lots of questions, but
Copy. Yeah.
yeah.
I feel comfortable leaving that for another conversation. And we've lost David. We bored him. No, I'm sure he had somewhere else to go. Question 19 and the last 2 questions quickly. How do you currently describe your gender identity? Please select the one you most identify with. My English major of a mother would not like that, but it's fine. Gender queer, intersex man, transgender woman, prefer to self-describe, ask you to specify, and then prefer not to say. Kelsey, yep.
Intersex is not a gender identity. That is a sex.
Oh. Thank you.
Yeah.
Whoops.
So would you just recommend taking that one out?
I mean, yeah, if we're wanting to ask about sex, so like assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth or intersex, we can have intersex. But
for this question as a gender identity question, we'll just remove it.
yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? It's okay if the answer is no. Yeah, thank you, Kelsey, for that. That's a great catch. How do you describe your race, ethnicity? Please select one. There's a lot of them here. I'll read them quickly. African American or Black, Asian, Indigenous, Native American, Alaska Native, Indigenous, Latin American, Latino, Latina, Middle Eastern, Pacific Islander, Micronesian, Native, Hawaiian, Kanaka Maoli, white, bi or multiracial, another race or ethnicity not listed here. Please specify if you prefer not to say. This one did experience edits this year. I'll highlight at least 2. The Indigenous Latin American as a separate category from Latino or from American Indian, North American Native as one. And then the second one was the addition of Kanaka, which I advocated for, which is the term that most Indigenous Hawaiians use for themselves in their language. Any other ones that come to mind? I can't remember what else. Those are the 2 big ones that I remember.
I'm curious why we selected just one. Please select one.
A lot of that is driven by facilitating the analytics. We borrowed this question. Actually, it was the survey I think, Kelsey, you had pointed us to that they did in the Bay Area. And it was followed by a fill-in, like share more information to help us understand your race and ethnicity. And we did that, I want to say online, but I would have to check. And in the hard copy, we did not. So we took their question. We edited the answer options, the Latino, Latina, we edited, and a few others as Joaquin has highlighted. But in the hard copy, we didn't have the open-ended option. And it was, their gender identity question from that survey, we also reapplied because last year's it was a check all that apply. But using a single answer option definitely facilitates the analytics. So the students and I were like, hey, they did this here and this is such a great questionnaire. We're going to borrow that and make our analysis easier.
I thought it was interesting that bi or multiracial is a choice within the list. If someone really identifies with multiple races or ethnicities, is that helpful to have that option?
I will say it scored highly
Mhm.
on levels of discrimination reported this year, the biracial, multiracial, which I also thought was interesting. It scored, this community even scored higher than other ethnic communities, which I think was it's just interesting observation. So people are definitely using it.
And I would be curious to see kind of what, I guess, looking at like perceptions or like, I think it would be valuable for the Human Rights Commission to know race and ethnicity breakdowns for people who are biracial or multiracial. I don't know kind of how that looks like data wise. I know, like you were saying, Marianne.
Marianne, could this be a moment where we and here I said we agreed up at 8:20 and it's 8:25. Could this be a branching question if someone selects biracial, multiracial?
Could be.
At least to maybe entertain that idea without having to decide right now, obviously, but just to think about that for you in terms of feasibility or analytics or anything like that. It is a little awkward that this biracial, multiracial could mean so many things, and the way that manifests is so varied.
Yes.
You know, I mean, and also even culturally, how do people engage with race? You know, what qualifies as being biracial, multiracial even depends on your context culturally.
Yeah, it's certainly feasible to whoever marks that.
I would also imagine a non-zero number of people who are multiracial, biracial choose one or the other on this survey. You know, I'm a biracial person. I have a white mother and an indigenous father, and I would probably just choose indigenous. I don't know what I would, so I presented with the same question. So I think that's also something to think about. To the extent, and to Kelsey's point, in that I wouldn't feel seen in the biracial category because it wouldn't be clarifying. It would be kind of like, I don't know. Just think about that. I promise we'll get out here by 8:30. Oh my goodness. Okay. Question 21. Do you identify as a member? Well, first of all, are we good with that conversation? Revisit it another time. Okay. Do you identify as a member of the queer community in regards to your sexual or romantic orientation? Yes, no, questioning, prefer not to say. Going once, going twice. Keeping it. Okay. Do you have a disability? Yes, no.
I guess going back to our earlier conversation, do we want to differentiate between physical and mental?
We've had some initial exploratory conversations there, and I think there's like 7 categories of disability, and it got complicated fast, and the students were like, yes, no, move on. But we could do physical, mental. Those are 2 categories that we're asking earlier about types of discrimination you may have experienced. So if you do physical, mental, other, and it's a check all, or a please specify. The yes here was a big in terms of like what attribute in the demographics made you like
Hmm.
correlated to higher experiences of discrimination, disability definitely did. Now, disability correlates to houselessness. But it would be worth revisiting that question to see if we add a few other options with a check all that apply that give us richer data.
Yeah, but my only reaction is, I think that the yes, no is not without merits, because I think there are other places in the survey where you can speak to your experiences based on type of disability that you have, including being able to list that you have experiencing discrimination on the basis of a physical as opposed to a mental disability. There are places for you to elaborate. So if kind of running on the questionnaire, making it long is a concern, then it wouldn't be my top priority in terms of changing it or making it longer. But we can revisit that. The question. Military veteran, yes, no, prefer not to say. Going once, going twice.
That's one, to be honest, I've wondered about cutting.
Really?
I guess
I don't know that we've done a lot with it. It's not a huge percentage.
Yeah, and it's not something that we do anything about. I mean, it's not one of the bases for discrimination earlier.
It was in past years.
Was it? Okay. I don't feel strongly that it needs to be a question if we're looking to cut for possible cuts.
Maybe let's put it as a flagging it for as a possible cut to return to later. I'm okay with that.
One thing for that, I know the word veteran, some people don't identify with that word, but then also it's like pretty specific. So like it's like active military. So I have heard from folks in that community to say, did you serve in the armed forces? Because that's like reserve. Yeah, so if we keep it.
If we keep it, yeah,
Yeah,
good
that's
feedback.
helpful. Thank you.
Last two, 1 minute over. Have you experienced, I'm not trying to get rid of you, I just need to have dinner. Have you experienced homelessness? Yes, currently, yes, previously, no, and prefer not to say. Going once, going twice.
I think, so I'm sorry to drag it up, but I think Marianne previously has talked about there's an interesting, I don't remember exactly what it was, that people who had previously maybe experienced homelessness or some sort of a correlation there that you were.
The
You say-
previously, but not currently, is a much bigger group than I had originally anticipated. In 2022, I think it was like about a quarter, like 26% of the respondents. And in 2023, it was 19%. So to say, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 of people walking around Salem, just doing normal things at the soccer field, the grocery store, the bus, the park, that we have, 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 people have previously experienced homelessness. It's a surprisingly high number.
Mhm. Which is to say, I think we should keep it as it's currently
Yeah.
worded.
Agreed.
Last one. Is there anything else about the community belonging survey that you would want to mention? This to me is, yeah, we'll keep that one.
I think the comments are very
Very rich.
insight, yeah,
Yeah.
very helpful. So I want to keep that.
Okay, I feel good about that. We got through all of them in the end. Thank you, Gretchen, for sharing, and thank you, Marianne, for joining us. I don't mean to wrap it up, but I do need to wrap it up. Hopefully, well, no doubt, right? This is more conversations to come. Thank you for your partnership and for all the work that you do with us and on behalf of the city. And we look forward to working with you again and again. Anything else that we didn't touch that needs to be touched on now
Quick, watch your email. I need to reschedule the October 25th meeting due to a council work session. So please watch your email for some ideas.
Maybe if you could send that thing, that list, that itinerary that we have for the other task force, that seemed to work for people there. Maybe it'll work for people here as an option.
I can do that with the exception of November because of my personal issue with the November date, but I can for October and December. Yes. Yeah,
I think it's just a difference of a week, I think.
correct. In
Um,
October. Yeah.
In October. But Professor Bradshaw, I had hoped to get to your reflections and your feedback for us. Anything urgent that needs to be said here now that you
I
want to
have
share?
about a 90-minute monologue prepared. No, just thank you. And you're wonderful.
Oh, well, we appreciate you. And we'll be in touch with Gretchen and you about when to have you back, but it'll be soon, and we'll keep everyone apprised on the translation and what's going on there. Anything else, Gretchen, that I need to get to
Nope.
on the agenda, or am I good?
I think you're good.
Any public comment, rather any member comments or anything for the good of the order? Thank you for staying on extra. I'm sorry to David, we lost him about 15 minutes ago, but it was good seeing you all. We'll see each other soon.